Leroy liked nothing more than a nice, relaxing, travelling holiday. He enjoyed the finer things in life, and had spent many weeks touring the great waterways of Europe, the Danube in Belgrade, the Seine in Paris, and the Rhine in Koblenz, amongst others. Dublin's iconic Yellow Line was his next destination. The line was the main navigational channel in the city. It meandered from its source in Bride's Glen, past several bollards and a scooter, before disappearing around the corner into Dublin Bay. Leroy was feeling somewhat blue, as it had been several decades since his last trip. Despite some glowing online reviews about several hotels along his planned route, expectations were low. Out of the 58,000 beds available for tourists in the city, surely Leroy could find some suitable accommodation. He could picture exactly the type of hotel he wanted to stay in. Spacious, bright, elegant, and tall enough for a spectacular view over the city skyline. Despite his initial skepticism and recent lack of enthusiasm for travelling, he'd come around to the idea and decided it was time to get off his backside, get out of the rut he was in, and immerse himself in some foreign culture and architecture. Leroy had finally begun his trip. Along the upper course of the line, he was surprised to see an abundance of nature on show. He observed several prominent interlocking spurs, which likely predated the Celtic tiger, and he could see what he thought was a rare golden eagle flying high above the valley. Leroy had given up birdwatching several years ago. However, he still occasionally enjoyed observing and tracking animals, and had become very familiar with their various fragrances and footprints over the years. He was glad to settle into his first hotel, and it didn't disappoint. Previous occupiers of this establishment had long since been resettled elsewhere, and Leroy was glad to have the space to rest, away from the groups of visitors who had all but taken over this area. Travelling down the middle course of the line, his mood was lifted further by the beautiful, spectacular, and imposing buildings. Looking out the window, he marvelled at the selection of boutique shops and luxury cars parked outside. Dublin was a modern, forward-looking city, but it was also a city in transition. Past the confluence of the Yellow Line and the main existing waterway, a splash was certainly been made. It seemed to Leroy that new developments were driving change in the city. Evidence from his trip so far was that Irish life was clearly changing for the better. Economic progression and all its benefits were transforming the city for the greater good. Leroy learned that this main waterway had been earmarked for covering over, following a successful trial that had been in place for several years on the northern bank. This strategy had been repeated in the past on other waterways, and had helped free up much needed space. The river was, after all, occupying prime real estate in an ever-expanding city. People were not happy and were demanding additional development in order to sustain the current rates of economic growth and to facilitate more visitors. More hotels, more offices, and more shops are required across the city to attract visitors and maintain prosperity. After some deliberation, the government had agreed to demands and given the green light to cover the main waterway. This seemed like the sensible thing to do. Pockets of water along the Yellow Line reflected the difficulties encountered covering and developing waterways in the city. Leroy had hoped that the government would be more successful with its latest project, and the city would be water-free in the near future. Leroy had saved the best for last. The original Victorian facade of the city's iconic Palace of Culture was as tall as it was impressive. Years of patronage from several generous benefactors, including private equity firms and investment banks, kept the palace in almost perfect condition. As the Yellow Line slowly meandered towards its final destination in Dublin Bay, Leroy was already looking forward to his next visit to the city. He was excited about how the city would evolve with the continued support of its many generous benefactors and developers. He imagined all of the new hotels and exciting developments that would exist on future reclaimed waterways. The possibilities were endless.